Hey everybody, this is Cedric from Bandite, and welcome to part 2 of this lighting guide. And we'll jump into more technical stuff today, so I hope you're excited. I am. Today we'll be covering the basic lights and what lights basically are, without getting too physical or sciencey. Okay, so let's jump right into this. I have a basic scene set up here, just with the Blender monkey Suzanne, who will be helping us in these first few tutorials before we step into more complicated scenes. And yeah, I just have a basic camera. I have a basic setup here. The background, these are world settings, just ignore it, but it's so that we can see the silhouette of the unlit Suzanne here. It kind of looks like these, who is this Pokemon? It's Suzanne, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so we have this basic scene. There are no lights, and we're gonna look on what lights do. So I'm gonna go into the add with Shift A. You can see, by the way, the shortcuts on the left corner here. If you want to follow along. So Shift A, and I'm going down here to lamp, and I'm just gonna change the cursor here and add a point light. So boom, suddenly we see Suzanne. And yeah, this looks very obvious. This, yeah, whatever, you added a light and suddenly we can see the subject. Light is something we see our entire life. It's actually the only thing we see, because if there's no light, we cannot see, because our eyes receive light. So, although this is the most obvious thing imaginable, this is actually something that takes some complicated methods to calculate within a computer. So, yeah, what happens here? So, I'm gonna give a little bit of technical explanation here, so you kind of understand how the render engine and how most render engines, not all of them, but most render engines calculate an image. So lighting is the key. So a render engine needs three things to calculate an image. That's a camera, obviously. That's a light, and in between comes everything else, like the meshes, the 3D, the effects, maybe, I don't know. Depends really. But in the beginning there is a camera, and at the end there is the light. And what the camera will do is shoot rays, just like for each pixel it calculates. So if you have a 1920 by 1080 image, it's a full HD image, you'll have millions of pixels, each being calculated what color they have by shooting multiple light rays towards everything in that scene, and it will actually get instructions. It begins at the camera, the ray, but once it hits a light, it has all the instruction it needs. It needs to calculate that one pixel. So that is the technical explanation. In more simpler terms, light lights object, and camera sees the light hitting the object. So let's get into the kinds of lights. The basic lights, we will not be covering volumetric lights or area lights or world lights today. We'll just be covering the basic lights, because you need the basic lights. So the first light, as I said, this is the point light, and this is very straightforward. It lights the subject from the direction it comes from. The point light has, like every light, some properties. It has an intensity, which we can control over here. Like if you raise this intensity, it will become more intense. Super obvious. It also has a color. These are the parameters we can control through in the render engine, because lights are always dependent on the render engine. These are cycles lights. If you use Blender internal, you'll be using Blender internal lights. If you're using Arnold or a game engine, Unity, that's a real-time renderer, they will each have their lights. Whereas meshes, like 3D meshes, they are not dependent on a render engine, and lights are. And in cycles, we can control the intensity and the color. So, and these two, you can also see them in the emission node here in the node tree. These two will like basically give enough instructions to what the light does, and it's very straightforward. Yeah, and this is this is very simple stuff, but I want to cover it. I want to go over this, so everything is explained. And it has some other options here in the lamp options, and this is of course cast shadow, which will, if you're just gonna cast some shadow, like here, the head casts a shadow on the ear. If we uncheck this, it will not cast a shadow. Of course, your first thought will be, why wouldn't cast a shadow? That wouldn't be realistic. But remember lesson number 1, we don't want to think realistic, too real. Yes, lights cast shadows, but sometimes we want to use a light to actually lighten something up, but we don't want to cast extra shadows, or maybe we want to create an environment or some creative choices which will require us, and it will happen. I've done this many times before. I mostly have more lights without shadows in my scene than I have lights with shadows for renders, for characters, anything. So it will be used. So remember this, the cast shadow. Then we have some more, like some other stuff. The size. This is a weird way for cycles to do this. The size will actually decide how hard the edges of the shadows are. So I put this to 0, and this will actually get. If we go more technical, it will less randomly, till the point to 0, where it will go very accurately, less randomly shoot the rays we talked about. So, and the bigger the size, the more randomness there is in shooting the rays, and the shadows will become way softer. Yeah, that's basically it. Put it to 0, you have very hard shadows. Put it to 1, you have very soft shadows. And you can go even higher, but you also get more noise, obviously. But I think it kind of depends on what kind of light you want to shine. Fill lights are going to be way softer, whereas if you have a very hard light, you will go way harder. It depends on the scene, depends on the mood, but we know it's there. And we kind of have samples. I think what this does is individually for each light tells it how many samples it has. We will discuss this in a later tutorial because that's going to be way more technical. Also the max bounces. In short, this will tell how many bounces a light can have before the renderer will ignore the light. So if you put this for 1 to 1 or to 0 even, if it has 0 bounces, it will just look directly like, okay, does this surface bounce off a light? Then it gains light. If the surface doesn't bounce directly to a light, it stays black. You can actually see this here if you look behind the ear. And this is now completely black. It receives no lights, but once we put in 1 bounce, it will receive some light. It's very subtle. If we increase the intensity here, you'll actually see also this lighting up. It's with a lot of noise because bounce light is a little bit harder to calculate. But once we increase the bounces, it will get more and more bounces. This increases render time a little bit. And some people will play with the setting to reduce render time, which is good. But it doesn't take up too much processing power. So if you don't want to play with it too much, keep it at 1024. That's good. But 24 will also do the trick. Okay. And these are kind of the settings we have within the cycles light settings. We will get into more intricate settings in later tutorials. So now, there are other types of lights, obviously. We can already see them here. You can also add them separately in the Add tab in Blender. Let's look at the second one, which is one of my favorite ones actually, and it's the sunlight. We're going to put the intensity way down to 1 or maybe 2. I'm gonna give it another color. And the sunlight is actually a directional light. It's the more technical term because directional lights aren't always sunlight, but it will like just shine on your entire scene from one direction, whereas the point light will originate from the point. This will cast light, so every light ray that's being shot that shoots in that general direction will receive light. And the reason this is one of my favorite lights is because it gives you fast control. I like lighting my busts or my characters or my sculpts this way, because if you don't want to have like too much effect of fall off, you really have to position your lights, and it gets a little bit messy. Though if I add like sunlights, I just can add. It doesn't matter where you put your sunlight, by the way. If you just keep these two, it doesn't matter where they stand. You don't have to put this behind it. It will shine over your entire scene. You can keep them in the same position. That's also a cool thing about sunlights. And then I already added like 2 lights, some kind of duotone going on here. And yeah, the sunlight will just shine over your entire scene. Though one thing to note is that it doesn't work like indoors. Because it will cast light from infinite, if that makes sense. So if you have walls that could block that light, just think about the real sun, right? If you are indoors, the sunlight will only affect like through the window. But if you don't have an enclosed space, the sunlight is a very nice trait for other kinds of light. It lights uniform, it doesn't have a fall off, and it just looks nice. And yeah, that's our second type of light. The third type of light, finally, is the spotlight. So the spotlight is actually a point light with a set region, a set cone. I can show the cone here, where it will light. So it has all the other attributes of the point light, and it behaves in the exact same way, where it has a fall off. And yeah, you can actually see. No, I don't know what determines. Oh, that's just a scale. No, I don't know what determines where the cone ends, because you can't. Oh yeah, you can scale it down. Yeah, it's just visual representation. Okay, good. But yeah, it behaves like a point light, but it acts in a cone. So if I decrease that cone here, you can see it will only lighten up what's inside the cone. So that these are the 2 extra settings. One is the size of the cone, and the other is how hard the edge of that cone is. So if I put my size here to 0, you can actually see it's a very hard line. It also depends on the size of the lamp, the shadow size. And if you increase this, it will be way softer. And in combination with the shadow light, this can actually create a very smooth transition, which is nice. This is also very usable. The first thing people think of, if you have to light a stage or simulate like lamps, but this is also very nice to light certain areas without you wanting to affect other areas. This is generally very nice to have, that you can point a light somewhere and just have it affect that area. And it will also come in handy. We'll definitely use these 3 lights in the coming tutorials. And these are the basic lights. You will see here that there are 2 other lights, which are hemi and area. These, the hemi actually does the same thing as a sunlight. I don't know, I checked the documentation. I don't know what's different about it. I think it did something different in Blender internal, and it's still there, but in Cycles it just behaves as a sunlight. And the area light is actually, it behaves like a spotlight, where the cone is on 180 degrees. So you just put here 180 degrees, just the blends on 0. Like if we just, yeah, look, it doesn't change much. The intensity works a little bit higher, but yeah, It's weird. It still has a fall off. The Hemi and area we're not going to use. I'm sure they had their uses, but I don't use them, and they're not like handier. They don't do anything different than the cone light, and the Hemi doesn't do anything different than the sunlight. So yeah, that's basically the 3 lights. And all you need to know how they behave. So to summarize, we have the point and the spotlight, which both have a fall off, which means the closer they get to the subject, the lighter they get, like regular lamps. And the spotlight, we have a cone, and the sunlight is a directional light, which is independent on its position. And yeah, it's just directional light that lights your scene, and it's awesome. So these are the basic lights. I know this is a very basic explanation, and maybe you've learned nothing today, but as I said, this is a guide, and I want every step of the lighting covered. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Also, a great thanks out there, because we just reached 4,000 subscribers, which is awesome. Me and Dave feel very humbled to have you guys watching us. So thanks for that again. Like and subscribe if you want to follow the rest of the guide. These tutorials will be coming out more frequently now, because I'm kind of settled now in my new place. So yeah, we'll have that. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll learn a little bit. I hope my technical explanation, there are better videos. If you really want to go super technical and really want to understand the stuff, you can just look up like not as much tutorials, but technical explanations on how the renderers work. And you can also find documentation on the Cycles renderer, which is very nice. But yeah, these were the basic lights, and we kind of covered them. So next tutorial, we're going to check on other kinds of illumination. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.